Ethics and Society, Deontology, Kantian Formalism, Part 2.
No, that's not big enough. No, that's not big enough either. That's more like it. We're delighted to have you with us, and we extend a cordial welcome to you. We've lined up the top stars from Hollywood and from all over the world to entertain you on our giant screen with the new, colorful motion pictures you've been hearing about and reading about. To add to your enjoyment, we're all wound up to bowl you over at intermission time with live wire service at our snack bar, where you'll find a tempting variety of favorite foods and beverages. Your continued patronage is very, very welcome.
All right, tonight's feature presentation will be starring me, Professor Kravitz. And that snack bar will be open the entire show. It's called Your Kitchen, and at any point press pause and go fix yourself some food. Okay, so this is part 2. The first part, we learned a little bit about Immanuel Kant. We got to know a little bit about his philosophy, his place in philosophical history, and a little bit about what he's trying to do in philosophy and in ethics specifically. So this is Kant's revolution in ethics. So let's look back at that triangle of ethics, right? This triangle, these 3 different access points, a way of analyzing the ethical event into the person who takes an action, and then there are consequences for that action. And recall from last video that Kant is a critical philosopher. He's going to work from within and start to question, and he's going to question each of these corners. Right? Each corner will be questioned, each angle will be questioned by Kant. And it's going to be very interesting what happens when he does this. So let's just recall these 3 angles. We have the good action, what should I do? That is deontology. We have the good life, or the consequences, which gives us something like utilitarianism, any sort of consequentialism. And we have the good person, or the good character. What kind of qualities should I have? Should I exhibit? Should I be? Because what are we but the qualities, the characteristics that make us up? And that would be virtue ethics. Okay, so we have our 3 angles. We are now going to see how Kant will question this. Right, I'm going to go one at a time. And remember, Kant is a revolutionary philosopher, so he's going to turn each of these angles, he's going to turn upside down. We're going to see them a little bit differently than we did before. Okay, so where should we start? Well, why don't we start with actions, because Kant is a deontologist. He is a non-consequentialist, so that's where he starts. That's what he thinks is primary. And there we have the question, what should I do? And what you should do is follow the moral rules, the moral laws. But Kant says, what do we mean by this? What does it mean to follow a moral law? And to ask that question, Kant says we need to figure out what it means for something to be a law at all. What is the definition of a law? And Kant comes up with this definition, that something becomes a law, a principle, a rule, if there are no exceptions, right? It has to apply to everybody equally and without exception. Otherwise, if it only applies to some people and not others, it's kind of just a suggestion. It's not a rule. It's not a law. laws, like the law of gravity, applies to all matter. There's no matter that gets to decide, okay, gravity does not apply to me. Right? If we have a law and this is all molar amounts of matter, all the sort of bigger clumps of matter cannot escape being governed by the law of gravity, this force of attraction. Okay, so for something to be a law means there are no exceptions. And that is going to be something that guides Kant in trying to figure out then what we should do. What we should do is follow laws that have no exceptions. And this becomes calls it his categorical imperative. And we're going to talk more soon about what that means. We're going to unpack that a little bit. But for now, the categorical imperative is that you must follow rules, and rules are principles that have no exceptions, which in deontology means this is what you have to do regardless of what the consequences are. It doesn't matter. Okay, so he's sort of shaken up this angle by looking at what we mean by laws and using that to then inform this principle, this basic principle for his deontology, which we're calling today Kantian Formalism, this categorical imperative. That there's no exception. If it's going to be a moral law, then there can be no exceptions. If it's going to be an actual law, and these are the laws we should follow, moral laws, if we're trying to be morally good. Right? Deontology. Okay. Well, what about the consequences of our actions, like a utilitarianism? So Kant questions that sort of an ethics, and the way he questions it is that we don't really know when we do something what exactly the consequences are going to be. There's a lot of factors that are completely outside our control that will help determine what happens. Our actions are only a small part of a whole series of causes that will contribute to whatever the consequences are. And all those other outside causes that are not based on our own actions are going to be things we have no control over. So we're a very, very small part of the cause of whatever happens. Right? I could try to go do a good thing, try to go help somebody. And there's a lot of things, even if I try to do that, there's a lot of things that could happen that could stop me from helping that other person. Right? Something could just fall out of the sky, and now I can't do that good act. I can't catch the baby that's falling out of the window. So, what does it mean to base your ethics on the consequences, and the consequences alone, which any consequentialism does, like both utilitarianisms? For Kant, he says it comes down to luck. You get lucky and you get a good consequence, because there's so many factors that you can't control, that are outside your control, that you may not even realize could affect the outcome. So is that, Kant asks, what we want to base ethics on? Is being good really just about being lucky that you got the consequences that you wanted, or that are good? And for Kant, this goes against everything. how could being a good person be a matter of chance, just getting lucky? He can't accept that. So he's going to have to reject all these different consequentialisms, and he's going to rethink it, right? This is a revolutionary philosophy. He says, okay, so the consequence that we should aim for in philosophy, in ethics, is not to actually have a good life, which is what utilitarianism is working for, right? They want you to experience more pleasure than pain and try to maximize that pleasure in your life and minimize the pain. And Kant realizes you could be a great person, you could follow all the rules and still end up with nothing, right? You could follow all the rules, open up a business, and all of a sudden, there's a new virus, and all of a sudden you have to shut down your business, and then you can't make payments, and it goes. But you're a good person, you did everything right? There was things out of your control, and now you are bankrupt, and you're losing that good life. And you're starting to question, well, should I have followed all the rules? Maybe I should have done some things that broke the rules, but that would have made sure that I would be more financially successful. And Kant says, well, in ethics, it's not about having the good life, because there's also a lot of people out there who seem to have good lives. They have all these products and beautiful houses and luxury cars and take lots of vacations all around the world, and yet they're not morally good. Right? They break a lot of rules, they break a lot of laws, they lie, they steal, they cheat. So for Kant, the aim of being a good person is not to have a good life. It's to be worthy of that good life. Right? It's to be worthy if you happen to be lucky and to have all those luxuries of life. If you're morally good, if you followed the moral laws, right? You've fulfilled your obligations, and you've also not done the things that are wrong, morally wrong, then you become worthy of a good life. And so if you happen to get a good life, if you're lucky, it's all the more richer because you're worthy of it. And then there's other people who do have what seems like a good life, but they're not worthy of it. And ethics will be able to tell us who's morally worthy. All right, so we can see how things are shifting, how Kant's not as concerned with the consequence of good life, but of being worthy of a good life. That becomes the new goal. And so let's turn to that third angle, right, where virtue ethics starts. The good person, right, the good character. So Kant looks at all these different virtues. Right? We said the good person has all these good virtues, and then with those virtues, they just naturally will do actions that grow out of those virtues, and they'll have a life that they can live with because they're a good person. All right, so virtue ethics, having all those virtues. Well, Kant looks at those virtues and he said, self-discipline, right? Being disciplined, having control over temptation, being able to be patient. So this is what we call a virtue. Well, that virtue could be used for good, but you could also use that virtue to be a better criminal, right? If you're a criminal that has self-discipline, so you don't just run out and grab something, but you're able to control your urges, to make sure it's the right time, to wait for the right time where you're going to be most successful, then that virtue is actually a benefit. It makes you a better criminal. Let's look at another virtue like courage, right? Being able to run into a risky situation, being able to, measure it out so you don't just run in wildly without thinking at all, but also not being a coward, willing to take risks when what's at risk is important. Again, being courageous could make you a better criminal, right? Willing to take the right amount of risk makes you a better criminal. You're going to be able to just steal more. So virtues, which before when we studied virtue ethics made you a good person, Kant's pointing out that all these virtues could be used for good, but they could also make you a better bad person, right? So he's causing a revolution in virtue ethics by putting forth all these questions. And so he says what really matters about who you are is not the virtues you have, but your intention, how you're going to use those virtues, right? What you will was, to Kant, more important actually than the virtues that might make up your character and the vices. It's how you use them, what you choose to use them for. So exercising your will, right, as your intention. So Kant says, well, what it means to be a good person is really not about your virtues, but having a good will. Willing to help, to care, to do the right thing rather than to do the wrong thing. That's what's most important. Not what virtues you have or what vices you have, right? But your goodwill. So Kant has overturned every single corner, right? With the moral action, it's now about this categorical imperative. And this is different than divine command theory, which we studied before, which said the rules are set forth by an absolute moral authority, and then divine command theory, that absolute moral authority is God. Here, Kant's not going to refer to religion, and he sees this as a benefit because there's lots of different religions in the world, and they all sort of pray to different gods, many of them, and many of them have different rules, and this will cause a lot of problems. If you're a divine command theorist, there's a lot of competition out there. But Kant thinks one thing we all share as humans is the ability to reason, and that reason is something that's universal, right? Laws, no exceptions. Everybody has to think under these same rules, logic. So if Kant can come up with the moral rules through reason alone, he thinks this is a way for us to get past our cultural and religious differences. So this is different than divine command theory. It's going to be based on, he's going to base it on, refer to reason alone rather than to a divine or religious source. Okay. We said the moral ends that we aim for now is to be worthy of happiness. It's no longer to be happy. And he thinks happiness is something that is luck. It's interesting. There's a lot actually to that. Go and Google about success and luck. And there's been a lot of recent research about how much of success really is based on luck. Okay. And the moral character now under Kant becomes the goodwill. And Kant thinks that the goodwill is the purest sort of good we can talk about. Because a goodwill, having good intentions, is not dependent on anything else than having those good intentions. Right? It does not matter what happens. So good intentions are true and good no matter what, if you have them. And Kant thinks that this is something unique to humans, that we can have a good will, that we can act with intention. And so this is different than other creatures that we come across. There's animals. When we look at them, we don't really know for sure what's going on in the mind, but we don't think that animal has the sort of sophisticated will, that it can just will to do the right thing because it is the right thing. That's a very abstract sort of thought to have and way to be. And Kant thinks it's unique to human beings that we could have that at sort of the core of who we are, that we will to do good because it is good. Okay. At this point, we're going to take a quick break, and in this first break, I think it says it's for older people, but I think it's for everybody, especially right now, where there is a lot of concern about health and wellness. This is maybe an appropriate message for everybody.
I'm George T. Larrick, Commissioner of Foods and Drugs. I want to talk for a moment with older Americans. The machines and the medicines you see in this room are fake and worthless health products that FDA has taken off the market. For example, this gadget claimed to cure baldness and serious diseases by giving off so-called master violet rays. It looks and sounds interesting, but it's absolutely worthless. This scientific-looking machine claimed to diagnose diseases by measuring the electrical currents on the skin. FDA scientists found it couldn't distinguish between a living person and a dead one. Don't be a victim of health quackery. Investigate before you invest. It's your money and your life.
All right, an important message from the FDA, and certainly at a time right now, there might be a lot of things out there that might be dubiously marketed to us. Okay, let's get back into our Kantian Formalism, and I had promised you that we would talk a little bit more about the categorical imperative. So let's just do that right now. All right, the categorical imperative is going to be distinguished from another type of imperative called the conditional imperative. So we have two different imperatives, and let's just say what an imperative is. This is a word that means command. And probably many of us first learned about this word when we were learning grammar. And it denoted a verb form, the form when we are commanding someone to do something. So for example, here I have push the desk forward. That word push is in the imperative form. Right? I'm not saying that someone is pushing. I am commanding someone to push something forward. So we're talking about commands. And Kant argues that there are two kinds of commands, two types of imperatives. So we have the categorical imperative and the conditional imperative. The categorical imperative we call an unconditional command. There are no conditions to this command. It's categorical. You have to do it, right? This is his categorical imperative. There are no exceptions. Everybody has to do it, no matter the condition, right? No matter the situation you might find yourself in. So, we often call this duty for duty's sake, right? So for something's sake is for some end, and here you're doing it just out of duty. That's it. It's the right thing to do, and you have a duty to do the right thing. Okay, it is its own end. So that's the categorical imperative. What then is this conditional imperative? And a conditional is a kind of statement that's called an if-then statement. And the if part is the condition. So an example is if you want to pass this class, right? So the condition is you want to pass something, then you should study. Right? So the condition is that you have a goal. You want to accomplish something, which is passing this class. The then part is that this is what you need to do. Right? This is the action you have to take, is you should study. If you study, then you have a chance to pass the class. So these are conditional imperatives. I'm not telling you to do something such as you have to study because it's your duty to study. I'm saying you have to study because that's how you're going to get something that perhaps you want, maybe you don't. So we have two sort of commands. Do this because it's the right thing to do. It's not that it's going to get you anything. It doesn't matter what's going to happen. You have to do it because it's the right thing. And then the conditional imperative, which is sort of telling you how to accomplish things. Right? If I want to get to point Z, then you should do A, B, and C. So we have this difference between the conditional and the categorical. Let's look at that a little bit more. Right? Let's get a little bit deeper into that. The conditional and the categorical. Well, categorical has this word category, and sometimes when we talk about things that are categorically wrong, that means that it's wrong completely. Right? It's just purely wrong. We also talk about categories in terms of by what something is. Right? When we try to define something, what we end up doing is we list out it's the different sort of essential characteristics of it. And each characteristic we could think of as a category. Right? And so when we divide something into its essential characteristics or its essential categories, then we know what something truly is. And we're sort of doing that with an action in the categorical imperative. We just are looking at it in terms of what it is, and being able to look at an action and really know what that action is doing, right? Looking at its essential characteristics, we can then make a judgment of whether or not it is morally good or morally wrong, whether or not we should do it without exception or not do it without exception, just by the nature of the action itself. So we have this word categorical in the sense of just due to the nature of the action itself, and that means we really have to understand really well what an action is actually doing to make that sort of judgment. And then it's categorical in the sense that there's no exceptions, that you just have to do this completely 100%. All right, the conditional, which we said was the if-then, is about having goals, right? This sounds a lot more like our consequentialist ethics, like utilitarianism, right? That you first decide what you're trying to accomplish, perhaps maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain, and then you do whatever you have to do to get that result. Right? That sounds a lot like a conditional imperative. Now Kant is going to say, okay, we could either act based on a conditional imperative, right? These if-then, which sounds a lot like a utilitarian, or we could act out of duty, doing the right thing because it's the right thing, acting. We can choose to follow moral laws because they're moral laws, and that's more the categorical imperative. So two different ways of acting. And Kant, in the reading that we did for class, has given a name to these two different ways of acting. The first way will be the conditional imperative. This is acting by inclination. Right? That you have certain goals you're trying to seek, and you do whatever is going to result in those consequences. At least you hope. Well, Kant says acting by inclination is a lot like how animals act, right? An animal tries to seek pleasure and avoid pain. And ultimately, that is also what the utilitarian is doing, trying to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So if you are just following conditional imperatives, which would be a utilitarian ethical theory, then according to Kant, you're acting no different than an animal acts. Right? You're acting like an animal. But we're humans, right? So we should also be capable of acting like a human. What does this mean to Kant, to act like a human? Here he says you act by reason, right? Out of duty. You figure out, using your ability to reason, you figure out what an action is, what its true nature is, and then whether or not it is covered by the categorical imperative, whether or not it's something that you either have to do or cannot do, because it's either morally right or morally wrong. Okay, so I think you're starting to get a better idea of the Kantian Formalism, and that it's all about following the moral laws, which is this categorical imperative. We could even, because remember we're trying to figure out ethics. We say, depending on what ethical theory that you hold a whole series of different rules that you try to follow, right? If I'm a utilitarian, I have a whole set of rules, and those are the rules I try to live by, right? I think about other people. I think about how my consequences of my actions, what those consequences might be for other people, not just myself. And we said that was like a principle of altruism. So here, we could talk about a principle of the categorical imperative. And as almost a principle of deontology itself, that you do what is right because it is right. It's your duty to do that. It's your obligation to do what is right because it is right, regardless of any consequences. So there are no exceptions. And that this, for Kant, is what it means to be a human. That animals can't do that. Animals can't reason what follows the categorical imperative. Right? What moral laws have no exceptions? An animal can't do it. An animal can't sit down and think about what is the real nature of this action I'm about to take, to see whether or not it violates any moral laws. So for Kant, utilitarianism is not being ethical at all. It's acting like an animal, right? Ultimately just seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And to truly be a morally good person, then we must act out of duty by using reason to, in a good will, to follow the categorical imperative. All right. Kant is not easy, and a lot of people run from Kant when they hear his name. Unfortunately, I can't run anymore, and I think there's actually, though Kant is kind of scary, there's a lot here, and it's very, very rich philosopher and philosophy. Okay, so one of the things Kant actually recognizes himself, he says, I know that my writing is dry. There's other philosophers, when you read them, and they're better at telling stories, and they come up with really vivid examples, and they draw you in, and Kant is not like that. His work is very dry. He's very interested in defining terms, and he's coming up with a lot of his own terms, and it's definitely a workout, a mental workout to read Kant. But please don't run away from him. All right, so the categorical imperative. Kant comes up with different ways, he says, of stating the categorical imperative. And we're going to look at 3 different ways. He calls them formulas of the categorical imperative. They all are the categorical imperative, right? But they, in restating them in different ways, they emphasize a different aspect of what it means to follow the moral laws. Okay, the first one is going to help us to just figure out what the right thing to do is, because so far, it's really not clear what exactly then is going to be a rule that has no exceptions, that is just right or wrong, and we just have to either do that, we are obligated to do that, take that action, or we are not permitted at all to take that action if we're going to be morally good. So this first formula is called the formula of universality, and this is going to remind us, when we studied utilitarianism, of that principle of universality that we said John Stuart Mill holds. And he came up with that principle. It was not one that Jeremy Bentham held, but it is one that Mill holds because he's trying to fix some problems, right? And he's actually taking his solution from Kant. So instead of just looking at a single action and what's going to be the consequences of that action, Mill says, well, let's think of an action as like a rule, that everybody does this, and then let's see what the consequences would be. He's taking that actually from Kant in this formula of universality. Okay, sometimes also called the law of nature. So what is it? Well, here is a quote directly from Kant for this first way of saying the categorical imperative. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. So what does that mean? It says that if you're thinking about doing something, before you take that action, think about whether or not you would still will to take that action if it was a universal law. If everybody took that same action, if they were in the same position, the same situation. So he says this will help us to figure out whether or not that action, that single action, is going to violate, or you could use it to say whether or not you're obligated to take the action, but usually we think in terms of violating the moral law, things we should not do, no matter what. Now, it's a little bit more complicated, right? Because Kant says we need to be able to use reason, and reason alone, to figure out these moral laws. So how's that going to work? Well, first Kant sort of gives us a way to get there. First he says think of it as a maxim, a sort of a personal rule. This is something that I should always do. But then he says, okay, once you've thought of it that way, go farther and say, okay, now think of it as a law for everybody. This is what everybody will do. And when you think of it that way, he says, you have to ask yourselves whether it still makes sense. This is that using that word sense in terms of, is it rational? Does it rationally make sense? Is there anything rationally wrong with it? And the main way to see if there's something wrong using reason alone, what we look for are contradictions. Is there some sort of contradiction here? And in logic, right, a contradiction is when you claim two things, one thing being the exact opposite of the other, and you claim both of them to be true. And that's a contradiction. So in making an argument, if you say everybody by nature has certain goals they seek, and these are shared goals, and then you also later on say everybody by nature has no automatically shared goals. And you seem to be saying two things here, and they seem to be the exact opposite. How could both of those be true? If someone tries to claim both of those at the same time, you'd say you've made a contradiction here. Or if I say that I'm wearing a shirt right now, and also I am not wearing a shirt right now, you'd say you're contradicting yourself. Those two things can't both be true at the same time. You either are or are not wearing a shirt. So, contradiction. This is the main thing that Kant is going to look for to see if there's problems. But remember, he's a mixed philosopher. Right? I talked about this last video. He's trying to bring together two different sides. He's trying to bring together thought and practice, to have a thoughtful, principled action. So there are two different types of contradictions we can look for, and that if those occur, then when we universalize an action, and it no longer makes sense, then it's not something we should do. We should never do that action if it creates a contradiction. So there's two different types of contradictions. One is logical, which I was just talking about, that you make two claims, and the second claim can't be true if the first one is. And the second way to have a contradiction is a practical contradiction. Right? So this is not internally, but externally, in just the practical considerations, there's a contradiction, that it can't be done, that it becomes impossible to complete. If everybody is doing it, it becomes impossible for everybody practically to be able to take that action. So that would be another type of contradiction that Kant thinks, if that's the case, then you should not take this action. Okay, we're going to talk more about this. This is pretty abstract still. I haven't talked about, well, okay, let's use this process of universalizing an action and figure out what we should or should not do. So I'm just setting it up so far. We are going to get to a point in this video where we actually think about, okay, so what can I do and what can't I do? And that becomes a big thing. Kant's not that big on giving us a lot of examples. He will give us a few, but he sort of leaves it up, and he thinks that's what humans should be doing, is thinking about what makes sense, morally makes sense. What things should we be doing? What should we not do? He thinks since we all hopefully have the ability to reason, that this is part of what it means to be human. And to be a human means we're thinking about our actions at this level. And if we're just thinking about trying to be happy and avoid pain, he says, you're not really acting like a human. You're acting like an animal. Okay, so we have our formula of universality. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so here is another formulation of the categorical imperative. This one is called the Formula of Humanity. And here's another quote directly from Kant for the Formula of Humanity. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. Right? So this is him rethinking the categorical imperative, and it has to do with how we treat other people and also how we treat ourselves. He's saying we have to treat ourselves as more than just some tool to accomplish some goal. And that's, he thinks, the danger of utilitarianism, is that everything is just an instrument, a means to an end. And he says humans are more than that. Right? We have a goodwill, which doesn't matter what it accomplishes. It's good in itself. And that to truly follow the categorical imperative means that whatever you're doing is not for some end. You do it because it's the right thing to do. And that we recognize other people as other special entities that are not mere tools, that now also operate under the categorical imperative, so that the categorical imperative applies universally to all people and to ourselves. We can forget ourselves that we are not just a tool, right? Kant thinks we can actually sometimes use ourselves to get something. We could trade away ourselves in order to get something. And he thinks this is wrong. He thinks selling yourself just to get some money so you could get something is wrong. You've abused yourself in a way. You've failed to recognize your own humanity, that you're not just merely something that could be bought and sold to get something. That there's something about you that's priceless. Right? That's just infinitely priceless in itself. And you shouldn't forget that. Right? So this is the formula of humanity. And on the bottom, I didn't really talk about this, but sometimes the first formulation is talked about as the objective conditions. And the second formulation, this formula of humanity, is called the subjective conditions. Objective being about the nature of the action itself, and the subjective conditions being about the nature of the actor, the subject themselves. All right, let's look at a third formulation. This will be the last formulation we're going to talk about, and he's just thinking about different ways to formulate the categorical imperative. So here's the quote from Kant directly. Thus, the third practical principle follows. Right? Follows from the first two I've already talked about. As the ultimate condition of their harmony with practical reason, the idea of the will of every rational being as a universally legislating will. All right, what's he talking about here? This is called the formula of autonomy. And we're going to have to talk about what that word autonomy means. But notice in the quote, he has the word will. And that word will is very important. That in order for an action to be, to lead to moral worth, it has to come from our will. We have to decide, have the intention of doing what is right because it is right. And that decision, that choice, is a necessary condition for following the categorical imperative. that we choose to, that this is our intentions, that we will this, that we exercise a good will. So in order to exercise your will, right, in order to choose something, that means you have to be free to make that choice. You have to be given the space to be able to choose for yourself. If somebody else is forcing you to do something, that doesn't count. If you don't actually know what you're doing, or if somebody is actually hidden from you what you're doing, then you haven't been able to exercise your own will. You haven't been able to actually be ethical. So this formula of autonomy is really getting at this sense of will, that we have to choose to do what is right because it is right. I said I was going to just say something about autonomy, and this is another word that has Greek roots. Autonomy sort of means self-rule, the freedom to make one's own decisions. If you're autonomous, then you're making your own decisions. So the roots of this word is auto, which means self, and then the word nomos, which in ancient Greek meant ruling or regulating. So we can see how this word together is about being in control of your own decisions and actions. You become autonomous. So intentions matter a lot in Kant's Deontology, in this Kantian Formalism. And if we do something with an intention that is based on a conditional imperative, that I will to do this because I want to get something from it, then for Kant, due to those intentions alone, you have not acted morally. So there's a fire, and there's somebody caught inside the fire. The fire has not gotten so out of control yet that stepping into that building will assuredly mean death. But the person who's caught inside the fire is not able to get themselves out on their own. Now, let's say you happen to know all this, and you run into the building, you grab the person, you bring them out. For Kant, that doesn't mean that you've just done something that was morally good, that has made you morally worthy, until we know what your intentions were. So if you ran into that room because you knew if you did it, you'd end up on the news and everybody would think you're great and you'd impress all these people, then for Kant, you have not acted morally. Because you have not acted due to a good will based on the categorical imperative. You're acting by inclination because you're seeking the pleasures of your 15 minutes of fame. So that would not be. But if your intention was that, in this situation, the right thing to do is to try to save that person who's in danger of losing their life, which is so precious. Human life, Kant thought, was extremely precious because we were the only creature, he thought, that had rationality and had a free will that could make decisions based on reason alone. If you save that person, not because it could lead to anything, not get you anything, but just because saving that person's life was the right thing to do, that was why you did it. That was your intention. Then, and this is the same exact action as the other person, but because you had this different intention, then you've done a good thing and it was morally worthy. Okay, I haven't been taking many notes today for this video, but that's because this is just so complicated. I'm hoping you're taking notes. You need to take notes. In fact, always take notes. Okay, so let's get back into the presentation, And actually, this is a good point to take another quick little diversion. And this little commercial break is interesting, I think, because from the last one, which was about quackery, which is a real word, and is a real problem. Was a huge problem throughout history of medical products claiming to do all these things, and they actually did not. So continuing that theme is our next commercial break.
Friends, why suffer from the miserable symptoms of colds? Take tiny Krypton tablets with the beneficial action 3 out of 4 doctors prescribe. Doctors will tell you that the cold virus enters here through nose and throat passages. Krypton reverses the trend. In case after case, Krypton relieved, checked, and even stopped cold symptoms for good. Why suffer? Why infect your family? Get Krypton, 12 tablets for only 39 cents, and stop cold symptoms fast.
Okay, Krypton. Very interesting. Only 39 cents, and it seems like in that video they gave away how Krypton works with those arrows. So it seems like you can get sick when the arrows are going in, but when the arrows are going out, you don't get sick. So as long as you don't breathe in and you only breathe out, you won't get sick. So thank you, Krypton. Did a little research. Krypton is no longer around anymore. They did renew their trademark in 1970, and then after 20 years, it expired and it was not renewed. So it's open, and if you want to use that name for your product, it is available. Krypton. Okay, let's move on. Now what we're going to do is what we've all been waiting for. Okay, got all this theory. Let's apply it to actual actions. Let's figure out what we should or should not do. What are these rules? So, okay, what we have to do, we go back to that first formula, the formula of universality, and we're going to use that first to try to figure out what is covered in the categorical imperative. Let's talk about talking in class, right? Something that we all think about doing, right? But now, because we're humans, we could think about this. We could think about the nature of that act, and that's something special to us. We'll do that. Let's think about talking in class. So we're in class to try to learn, right? That's what a class is. It's a place where you go to learn things. That's just a definition of a class, and it's something we should accept if we're being rational. All right, now talking in that class. What if, according to the formula of universalization, before you decide to talk, what if everybody, whenever they're in class, talked? What would happen? Well, if everybody is talking to each other during a class, then nobody is listening to the teacher, which means nobody will learn anything. This becomes a contradiction, right? A class is a place where we go to learn, and yet that becomes impossible. No one is learning in that classroom if everybody is talking. So Kant is going to have to come to the conclusion that talking in class violates the categorical imperative. And therefore, under no circumstances should you have side conversations in class, according to Kant. Because then the whole idea of a class doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense if you're going to a place to learn and then you can't learn due to this action. So it becomes universally prohibited by Kant. Oh man, never said deontology. It's easy, right? Because these are things you should never do, no matter the consequences. You should never talk in class. It would be morally wrong. even if you needed to tell somebody something. Maybe they dropped their wallet. You just want to let them know they dropped their wallet. But talking in class is violating the categorical imperative. That would be morally wrong to say something in class, during class, maybe after class. You could let them know they dropped their wallet. Perhaps you write a note to yourself to remind you, let them know after class they dropped their wallet. But during class, it would always be morally wrong, no matter what the consequences are, no matter what's at stake, to talk. All right, let's think about this next example, which I call the red shirt world. All right, so we all have to get up in the morning, and we have to choose the clothes that we're going to wear for the day. And most of us have red clothing. Is it morally right to choose to wear red colored clothing? Right? Should I pick that red shirt? Is this something that is imperative, a rule that I should follow? Well, let's think about this. Right? Everybody in that situation in the morning when they're choosing out their clothes, what if everybody chose red clothing? Right? Would that cause any sort of contradiction, either logically or practically? So, logically, everybody wearing red clothes. Well, that's still something that, to me, that makes sense, right? The world is not going to no longer make sense if everybody puts on red shirts. So I think, logically, there's no problem here if everybody wears a red shirt. There's no definition of the world that no longer makes sense. What about, though, practically? Is there any sort of contradiction? If everybody wore red shirts, would that become an impossibility? Well, I also think that that's something that's totally possible. That we could just create a lot of red shirts and there'd be enough for everybody so that we could wear a red shirt every day. So there doesn't seem to be any contradiction here, any problem. So what does that tell us? That tells us that there's no moral prescription that says we have to wear a red shirt in the morning. So in the end, this becomes something that's not a moral issue at all, right? Because whether or not you choose a red shirt will have no violation of any of morality, because it will cause no contradictions when we turn it into a principle. What about if I choose not to wear a red shirt? And everybody chose not to wear a red shirt. Would that cause any contradictions? Would that not make sense? Would the world no longer make sense if everybody chose not to wear a red shirt one day and we all wore blue, green, pink, and orange shirts that day? And again, that doesn't seem to cause any sort of contradiction. The world still makes sense to me if everybody wore those, either any of those colors I just mentioned. And it also seems that it's practically possible. We could just create enough shirts of those colors that nobody has to wear a red shirt. So again, not wearing a red shirt causes no contradictions when we universalize it. So therefore, there's no obligation to wear a red shirt, and there's no prohibition from wearing a red shirt. So you can wear a red shirt or not wear a red shirt, and you will not be violating the categorical imperative. It's no longer an ethical matter what color shirt you wear, just based on the color. Okay. So using the categorical imperative and this formula of universality, we'll say that the color of the clothing you wear is up to you, and it's not a moral issue. You're neither obligated or prohibited from wearing different colored clothing. All right, let's talk about theft, stealing. Is that something that we should never do? Well, we have to universalize it. So what does it mean? We have to think about what's the nature of theft. So in order to steal something, somebody else has to have something, right, that's theirs. And then you go and you take it. Right? That's theft. It's the nature of theft. So now we have to say, okay, what if everybody just went and took other people's property? Would that cause any contradictions? Well, the definition of property is that this item is mine and not yours. And therefore, I get to do what I want with it and you don't. But that's the definition of having something that is your property. But if everybody just takes whatever is other people's property, right, that will contradict the very definition of property. If somebody can just take whatever they want, then the word property no longer makes sense, right? Because it meant that you couldn't take it. But now everybody just takes everybody else's stuff. So the whole concept of property no longer makes sense. There's a contradiction, whether or not you can or you cannot just take things. And so this causes a contradiction, and therefore, by committing theft, by taking somebody else's property, you are violating the categorical imperative. So Kant thinks you should never, if somebody else has something that's their property, you can never just take it. It's always going to be wrong to just take somebody else's thing. You need to ask for it. They need to lend it to you or give it to you of their own free will. But if you just take it, you've violated a categorical imperative. You've acted wrong. Okay, let's talk about murder. Is it wrong to murder people? So this is different than divine command theory, where you just are commanded, you have commandments, and one is thou shalt not murder. Right? But not everybody has the 10 commandments, and Kant says everybody, though, has reason. Can we, using reason alone, determine whether murder is wrong, is morally wrong? So Kant says we have to think about what murder is. Right? We murder somebody because they're a problem for us. Right? So we go and we murder them. What if everybody did that? So if you have a problem with somebody, then you murder them. Kant thinks on both levels we could have contradictions. So everybody has problems with everybody. So on a practical level, everybody might be killing each other. You might have nobody left. That creates a contradiction, because the idea is that we're trying to solve our problems. But if there's nobody left to solve those problems, then how could problems be solved? On the other hand, just logically, in order to solve a problem with somebody, that somebody has to exist. But if that somebody no longer exists, how can I have a problem with somebody who exists and who does not exist? So there's a contradiction there in terms of solving our problems. And so Kant's going to say that murder violates the categorical imperative and is prohibited in all instances, no matter what. Doesn't matter what's happening, what's going on, whether you're a soldier that's out ordered to fight an enemy that may be trying to shoot you. It would always be morally wrong to murder somebody else. Doesn't matter if that person is trying to murder you. It's wrong for you to murder them. Murder is always wrong. And if you're trying to murder them, to save your life, then you're acting by inclination. Right? You're not doing what's right because it's right. Okay. Suicide. So with suicide, let's think in terms of the second formulation, right? The formula of humanity. So suicide, someone commits suicide, it's what? Why do they do that? Most people commit suicide in order to relieve themselves of the pains of their existence. And Kant thinks that means you're treating your life as something you can trade away to get something, relief. And this would violate the formula of humanity, that you're not just something that can be a means to an end. That your life is not something you can sell, trade for something else. That it has value in itself that is priceless. So Kant thinks suicide is going to violate the categorical imperative, and that it's always wrong, not just to murder somebody else, but also to take your own life. And again, Kant, these are rules that have no exception. So it doesn't matter how much pain you're in. For Kant, suicide's always going to be wrong. It's always going to be treating yourself as just a means to an end. So it always will be violating the categorical imperative. What about lying? And this was what we talk about in the discussion board that I had assigned. I said, let's talk about lying. When do you think lies are okay? When are they not okay? Well, what does Kant think about lying? And this is something that he writes about. What does it mean to lie? Well, we've got to think about the nature of the action itself. To lie means you tell somebody something. They believe you're telling them the truth, but you're not. That's how lying works, right? Somebody has to believe you're telling them the truth, but you're actually not. All right, so let's universalize this action of lying. What if everybody lies? Right? You're trying to figure out whether or not you should lie about something. You say, okay, I know what the nature of lying is. You tell somebody something and they think it's the truth, but it's not. What if everybody did that? Well, if everybody tells everybody else something that's supposed to be true, but it's not, but everybody does that, and everybody's going to know that everybody's lying, that whatever you're being told, it's false. Is there a contradiction here? Kant says yes. Because for lying to work, you have to expect that you're being told the truth. But if everybody lies, then nobody expects that they're being told the truth. And therefore it becomes impossible to lie. Right? You can't lie if everybody lies. The only situation which lying works is if you don't expect everybody to lie, but you expect you're being told the truth. So lying is going to create this contradiction. It doesn't make sense when we universalize it. Therefore, you should never lie. It's a violation of the categorical imperative to lie, and we should always tell the truth. Now, we're going to talk in a few minutes about problems that might arise here, and how we can sort of question this deontology, this Kantian formalism. But right now we're just trying to figure out what these moral laws are according to Kant, these universal moral laws. And one of them is never lie, never commit suicide, never murder, never steal. It's okay whatever color you want to wear, but you should never also talk in class. All right, let's as one final thing, let's talk about physical relationships. And here I want us to look at that last formalization, the formula of autonomy. So if you're in a physical relationship with somebody and you force yourself on that other person, would that be morally wrong? when we look at the formula of autonomy, we know that in order for any action to be moral, one must make a choice to do what is right because it is right. But if you force yourself on somebody else, you take away their ability to exercise their autonomy. So you violate their autonomy. And this is going to violate the formula of autonomy, that version of the categorical imperative. So for Kant, in any relationship you're in, it will always be wrong to force yourself on the other person. That person always has to choose to have made their own decision on what they are going to do. So Kant teaches us that you should always ask for consent from the other person in any sort of relationship. Okay, quite a bit here, and hopefully Kant is feeling a little bit more, making a little bit more sense to you. All right, that's all he wants, is for things to make sense, and that's the hardest thing to happen with his theories, for it to start to make sense to people. Hopefully that is happening, and it's starting to make sense how he approaches ethics, the principles that he's going to hold on to, the rules he's going to hold on to, like the principle of the categorical imperative, this principle of autonomy, the principle of humanity. All these different principles he's going to try to live by to do the right thing. Okay, I think we need another little break. So we're gonna watch this last break. In philosophy, what we've been doing this whole time is using our heads. Been doing a lot of thinking, trying to figure out what the heck is Kant talking about. And so heads are very important in philosophy. Our heads are very important in life. And here we have, for this commercial break, a little message about protecting our heads.
Motorcycle and scooter on the fashion scene. Black leather favored by Mike, the motorcyclist, for protection at speed. Fitted beige jacket in corduroy favored by Richard for scooter riding. As pillion rider with Mike, Mandy keeps to the black leather theme. While Sue, the scooter girl, likes the comfort of a loose-fitting woolen jacket. White peaked helmet completes her outfit. For Richard, it's a deerstalker helmet. He thinks it's the tops. The tops for Mike and Mandy are a pair of matching silver helmets. Fashions come and go, but heads are here to stay. Get into the right gear. Always wear a safety helmet.
All right, so now I'm wondering if I should be wearing a safety helmet while I philosophize to protect my head. Maybe that's I'll do a note to self. Note to self: invent a helmet for philosophers to protect their heads while philosophizing. All that thinking. I think one of the big issues might be overheating. So possibly a helmet with a fan system to prevent the head from overheating from all that thinking. Okay, this teaching thing doesn't work out. I'm gonna have to do that helmet product. Okay, so as with all the other ethical theories, once we've sort of gone over a little bit, we've introduced ourselves to that to the theory. We talk a little bit about problems, right? Lingering problems with Kantian formalism. that if we become hardcore Kantian formalists, there's some problems that might arise. And I'm going to actually go through 3 different issues that the Kantian formalists should probably think about, because they are issues. And remember, I said every single ethical theory we look at has problems, right? So none of them are going to be without issues, and that's why there's no winner, right? There's no universally recognized this is the ethical theory. These are all theories that are all viable and all with their positives and their negatives. There's strong aspects and there's weak aspects. All right, so let's see this first one. I call this the radical consequences problem. So this is gonna be a problem for any deontology where you have rules that you have to follow no matter the consequences, right? They're absolute rules. And but what if those consequences are extremely radical, right? So before we said one of the rules is you should never murder, no matter what, right? For this to be a moral law, there's no exceptions. So in using reason, we said that it would not make sense if everybody murders. So what if, though, killing one person would save Earth, but if we left that one person live, all of humanity dies? So these are radical consequences. Would it still be wrong to kill that one person? Or to be morally good, should we allow humanity to completely die out? So this is a radical consequence because it's really sort of pushing deontology to limits. So deontology, Kantian formalism is saying you never think about the consequences. And this particular scenario is saying, yeah, but what if the consequences are this severe? Doesn't it make sense that in ethics should think about the consequences when they're this important, this far-reaching? So that's an issue that this ethical theory is going to always be challenged with, right? That maybe some consequences do matter. And to be a radical, a pure Kantian formalist is to say they never matter. And here we have to wonder, well, maybe sometimes they could matter. But if they do, then that will be the beginning of the end, right? Possibly, to Kantian formalism, to any deontology that says, consequences don't matter. Okay. And I sort of pointed this out with suicide, euthanasia. What if someone's very close to death and in such pain that it's unbearable? Right? Is it still wrong for them to end their life if they're experiencing unbearable pain? And this is another way in which Kantian formalism is really challenged. Because it seems like if someone's very close to death and is experiencing unbearable pain and they themselves choose to end their life at that point, people start to think, maybe that might be okay. Okay, so the radical consequences problem. Let's go on to the next problem. This is the spirit versus the letter of the law problem. And so how does this work? Well, we have this rule, thou shalt not murder, right? Always wrong. Let's say I grab a gun and I pull the trigger, little piece of metal flies out of the barrel and slams into somebody. Now, did I commit murder? Well, if we're looking at the letter side, right? And this is sort of what did I do? Well, sending metal through the air, is that something that's morally wrong? Metal flies through the air all the time. Airplanes are metal and they fly through the air. Well, why would that be wrong? Okay, but let's say I did shoot a gun and I hit somebody. They don't die instantly, right? They're just laying there. Did I kill them? No, a lot of people get shot and live if they get medical care right away. Right? And if the ambulance took 10 minutes to get there because of traffic, was it I that killed them? Or was it actually the ambulance service that took so long to get there? If they had gotten there early, the person would have survived. I would not have murdered them. I can't be held accountable for murdering someone. They would have survived if the ambulance showed up on time. So the letter of the law problem is that anytime we talk about doing something, we could look at it in different ways, where we could say I did not violate the categorical imperative because I did not murder. It wasn't me that killed him. It was the amount of time it took for the ambulance to arrive. If the ambulance had gotten there sooner, then that person would have lived. So it wasn't me that caused them to die. It was the ambulance. Same thing with stealing, right? Taking somebody else's property. If you intend to give it back at some point, then you could say I wasn't stealing, I was just borrowing. So anytime you take something, if you also have the intention that you at some point in the future, not sure when, but I intend at some point to give this back when I'm done, then you could say I was just borrowing. And then you could say I never have ever violated this principle that says I can't steal. It's wrong to steal. So this is a problem in Kantian formalism in terms of how we spell out what we've done. And it's a way of trying to find sort of loopholes around these categorical imperatives. So this is another issue that Kantian formalism has to reckon with. And one final, this is the last lingering problem in Kantian formalism for us to think about. This is called the hidden intentions problem. And I think this one is actually a big problem. So here's the thing. An action has moral worth, right? It has the ethical value if, when you do it, your intention was to do the right thing because it was the right thing, right? That you exercised a good will. So we need to know your intentions to judge whether or not an action was that you were following the categorical imperative and that you were acting moral. Here's the problem. We don't always know even what our own intentions are, right? We're inside our own heads, and sometimes we do things and then later on we realize, oh, this is why I really did that. So if we don't fully have access to our own intentions, how can we ever know for sure why we did something, right? Now, Kant had sort of a little bit of an answer to this. He said, well, there's sometimes when we do things and clearly there's no benefit we are getting from that action. And therefore, clearly, those actions would be done purely because it was the right thing to do. And therefore, those are the actions that we can definitely say for sure had moral value. And right, that happens a lot. We look at politicians, and when they make a vote in Congress, let's say, and that vote's going to hurt them with their base. You say, okay, well, they didn't do that to try to get votes. They're going to get hurt by that vote. They did it because that's what they believed was the right thing, and there's real moral value. And there's someone who's really trying to be to be morally good by taking the right action because it's the right action. here's the problem. Even in those cases, you might realize that people are going to see this now as a really morally great action and as a really a morally strong person. So maybe there actually is a benefit, even when it looks like there's no benefit. The benefit is that others will recognize, if they find out about this act you took, that you did something that had no benefit for you, that eventually would have a benefit. People know about it. So, even actions that you take that seem to have no benefit for you could have a benefit if other people knew you took that action, and that now they would see you as acting more, following the moral laws, and acting with a good will, and doing what is right because it's right, despite the consequences, right? And the consequence is actually going to harm you. You still did the right thing. That itself is also a benefit, because the benefit is that people will see you as worthy of any happiness you might get in life. That you become morally worthy, and that will always be a benefit, right? So that becomes no action that you can take that has no benefit to you when you're following the categorical imperative. So this is a problem, because we don't always know our own intentions, and we can never be sure. Even if it's an action where it seems like it's just going to harm us, there's still a benefit there. We may be doing it for that benefit and not just because it's the right thing to do. Okay, so that is going to conclude the second part of Kantian formalism, and we've now gone completely around that triangle, and you have hopefully a good sense of all the different major ethical theories, and we're going to discuss some more ethical issues, and we're going to see how in our arguments how we can rely on these different ethical theories. Okay, thank you, and I will see you soon.